Okay, this is unit 3.3, inflationary gaps and recessionary gaps. First part, let's talk about your short-run aggregate supply, aggregate demand, x-axis real GDP, average price level, graph we've been looking at. So the first thing I want to focus on before we get to the gaps is the dot. Okay, I always tell kids, the most important thing here is where is my dot? Well, what's the dot? The dot is this dot right here. Right where your equilibrium meets, right where your supply and demand meet is your equilibrium, tells you your equilibrium price, equilibrium quantity at that particular space on the graph. So it either means it's your equilibrium, but it's also called, and this is a term you're going to hear often, you have to know, the current output. Where are we currently at in the economy? Okay, so in this particular place, we know that we are currently here at whatever this is price level, at whatever this is quantity. And there's nothing wrong with that, so I'm going to call them Q1 and P1, because that's the first space. If we move, if demand shifts to the right, then my price level is going to be up here and my quantity will increase. If demand shifts left, my price level drops, quantity decreases. If supply shifts to the right, increases, quantity increases, price level decreases. It's just the same way how supply and demand work. So nothing should be new here. Now that we're talking about the entire economy, this is real GDP. Where are we if we're in a recession? Let's take a look. Where are we in a recession? Well, ask yourself, what's a recession? A recession means there's two things that happen. Unemployment is up. How do we know unemployment is up? Well, we look at how much output we're producing. If we're producing less, that means less people are working. If we're producing more, then more people are working. So if unemployment is up, at the same time, output must be down. So if I tell you there's a recession, you go, unemployment up, output down. So where must this dot be? Well, output is here. We said unemployment's up, so therefore we're producing less of it. So when unemployment occurs, output has to be, the dot must be somewhere to the left. If unemployment goes down from this case, that means output must be the opposite, must be up. So output must be that way. If we're at the perfect spot of what we say full employment, which is the same, full employment is the same thing as the natural rate of unemployment. But we're not talking about unemployment, we're talking about output at full employment. What's the output level? So that spot, if we're at what's called full employment, is going to look like this, the graph. Put income at full employment, YF, or you could write QF, quantity, let's write QF, quantity at full employment. Our dot's going to be right here. So that means we are currently at full employment when we look just like this. This is what we call the long run equilibrium. Aggregate demand graph, aggregate supply graph with long run aggregate supply. It's a really long name for a graph. But we say we're at long run equilibrium. Okay? All right, good. So let's talk about this graph. Let's just look at it from the long run point of view. The long run point of view, just like we said before, you have average price level, real GDP, long run average supply. There's no supply and demand. AD and AS is not there. However, if the dot, the current output, is anywhere on this long run curve, regardless of price, we're operating at full employment. The NRU is 4.5 to 6%. We know that. If this dot moves in this direction, it becomes a recessionary gap. If it moves in the other direction, it becomes an inflationary gap. Why? Once again, just to repeat, because here output is down, right, closer towards zero. Here output is closer towards a much higher number. So inflationary gap here, producing more, producing less, producing, boom, in the middle, right where we want to be, full employment. So where are the dots? I tried to make them color coordinated here. So my green dot, right, my recessionary gap to the left of the long run is also inside the PPF. It's also on the downward side, close to the trough on the business cycle. Where's my inflationary gap? On the right here, It's outside the PPF for capital and consumer goods, and it's on the upward outputs on the business cycle. And of course, the black dot represents full employment at around the natural rate of unemployment. So, last part of this, you're going to see questions on the exam that are going to ask you to draw one of the problems in macroeconomics. And the two biggest problems that we try to fix throughout the next couple of units is a recessionary gap and an inflationary gap. How do we get the economy to get people, give them more jobs during a recession? How do we get the economy to slow down production because we're overproducing? Supply is exceeding demand. We don't need to produce that much. We're going to inflate the economy. That's not good either for the economy. So you want to be right around the middle. So you're going to get terminology like this. The U.S. is operating below full employment. Below full employment. What does that mean? Operating below full employment means we're going to be operating on this side, right? The recessionary side. So in this case, if you see the word the U.S. is operating below full employment, we have a recessionary gap. The U.S. is operating above full employment, then we have a inflationary gap. Put that in red. And the third one, the U.S. is in a deep recession. Well, that's pretty simple. It means we're in a recessionary gap. And for the last one, the U.S. economy is overheating. They probably might not use the word overheating, but they're overproducing, overheating. We're somewhere beyond where we should be. Then we, of course, have an inflationary gap. So you're often asked to draw the U.S. economy showing ADAS, long-run aggregate supply, in a recessionary gap or in an inflationary gap or in long-run equilibrium. So one way to remember it is where do you put that long run to show the identification of that. So if I want to draw a recessionary gap, where do I put the long run aggregate supply? The correct answer is the current must be to the left of the long run. So the long run is to the right of the current. And then I label long run aggregate supply, and then I could label my current, right, my price at current output, and my quantity current. Over here, what do I put? How do I label long run? Income or quantity at F. That doesn't change. Quantity at F. What about the other side? How do I identify an inflationary gap? Well, it's the opposite. The dot's going to be on the right side of the long run. So I put my long run aggregate supply here. This is my long run aggregate supply. And I put quantity F. And now what do I label here? You should know by now. Price at current or quantity at current. If the AP exam tells you to label it something else, then you do whatever the AP exam tells you to do. All right? Inflationary gap, recessionary gap. Pretty soon we'll talk about how to fix the problems with fiscal policy. Okay?